Good morning. Day 58, Tuesday, the 19th day of May 2020. I'm Vincent J. Russo with the Russo Law Group. And today, by popular demand, I have Rob Russo coming back to be with us on our daily check-in. How you doing, Robert?
Very good.
Great. Great to have you. The ratings went through the ceiling when you talked about Lights Out on Broadway.
Right.
And today, what we want to talk about are the elections. Now, you've had a very interesting professional career as you have worked with Hillary Rodham Clinton, the secretary, for over 12 years, since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And you were on two of her campaigns. You were in the State Department, and now you're working with her in her private life.
Yes.
So during the day, you're working for the Senate, the secretary, and at night, you're hitting the streets of Broadway.
Exactly.
What a life. So I want to talk about the upcoming election, and lots of questions here. The big picture question is there going to be an election?
That's a big question. The short answer is yes. It's defined by federal statute as being the first Tuesday after the first Monday in the month of November since 1848. So we're hard pressed to skip it this time around. This year it'll be on November 3rd. But before we get there, of course, in New York State, there is a state and federal primary election on Tuesday, June 23rd. So that's actually the first election we'll be having in New York in these times.
All right, so you're confident we're going to have an election this year?
There will be an election, yes.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the second question, which is the issue of in-person voting. Right. If the virus has a second round and it's dangerous to be out there and it's difficult to do the social distancing, maybe at the voting polls, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, the like I mentioned, the first election is going to be in June. So we can get a window into sort of a test run into how that might look in New York State. Governor Cuomo issued an executive order in early April that expanded the definition of what you can apply for an absentee ballot for. So temporary illness is now defined additionally as risk of contracting coronavirus, which is all of us. So we're all eligible to apply for an absentee ballot for the June primary. And I believe that is, as of now, the plan for November as well. So in Nassau County and Suffolk County, you can go online to the Board of Elections website and print out a form, fill it out, and email it or mail it into the office. And in Nassau, you can actually call the Board of Elections and request an absentee ballot over the phone. In New York City, where I am, you can fill out a form online and submit it for an absentee ballot. And as you just alluded to, the reason you want to do that is to avoid in-person voting if you can, so you can vote from the safety of your own home.
Yeah, and what's interesting is on Friday, this past Friday, I did receive in the mail a form that I could fill out that requests the absentee ballot.
Correct.
And both for the upcoming primaries and also for the general election.
There you go. Yeah, so the plan is being operationalized as we speak.
What's the concern that we hear about voting by mail? Is there any greater risk of fraud or less fraud when people are voting by mail rather than voting in person?
Yeah, well, a great benefit of our system of government, as maddening as it can be at times, is that we do have a federalist system. So we have 50 different states plus DC that each have their own processes for voting. And as of today, there are 5 states that have a history of doing all vote by mail. And there's going to be a 6th state, again, as of today, in November. So we can look to them to learn, sort of best practices. They're all out in the West, Washington State, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and then soon to be California and also Hawaii. And what they have discovered is that there is actually, much like there's very little evidence of in-person voter fraud, the amount of voter fraud that you might see in a vote by mail situation is so little as to be de minimis.
All right,
and that's what their experience has proven.
so we can feel comfortable to do the voting by mail, which also makes it easier for people, especially in rural areas where they've got to travel a great distance to get to the voting polls.
Yeah.
What other concerns do you have regarding the general election in light of COVID-19 crisis that we've been in?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess the big thing is vote by mail, because even though there are those those 6 places that are doing it entirely vote by mail, for the rest of the country, it's a real patchwork of counties and municipalities that are all administering the election on a state-by-state basis. And they all have to come up with their own processes and procedures to expand vote by mail or absentee voting. And I read recently that in 27 states, less than 10% of the voting population has ever voted by mail. So what that means is you have a lot of voters nationwide who have no experience doing it. So you have to do an awful lot of voter education on the front end to make sure people understand how they can apply for a ballot, how they can fill it out, how they can mail it back in. And then from a state perspective, it's a resource issue, right? You need to have enough ballots. You need to have enough envelopes for those ballots. You need to provide for postage. There's a whole array of issues that the planning has to start now, because in most states, the state isn't printing those ballots. They have a third-party vendor that's doing it. So they have to get contracts in place. And then the vendors have to be well-stocked with the supplies and the machinery and the staff in this pandemic situation to be able to fulfill those orders. So there's a lot of small things like that that need to be really ramped up so that we're prepared to vote. And then the biggest thing, of course, is we need to have a functioning postal service, because you can't vote by mail if you don't have a post office. So, and if you believe what you read, the post office is set to kind of default come September if they don't receive federal assistance. So there's a handful of big issues that have to be worked out that are all tangential to the idea of voting by mail as a safety precaution.
Well, I just can't imagine a day when we don't have the U.S. Post Office. So,
well, yeah.
but it's just mind-boggling to me. Yeah. We'll just have to see, and that'll be another reason to bring you back to update us as we get closer to the election.
Exactly, yeah. Because as I mentioned, it's despite the fact that it's a national election in November, it's administered by 50 states plus DC. So each state is going to have its own rules, its own processes, including here in New York.
Yeah, it seems in so many different ways that this COVID-19 virus and the crisis we've been in has really changed the way we're living and thinking about the choices we make on a daily basis. So the times they are changing, and that's going to be true with the election as well. So I want to thank you for your insights. Yeah. And as I said, we'll have you back because you always help my ratings too.
Happy to do it.
Right. And to all of those watching and listening, just please be safe. Continue to do your social distancing. Everybody be safe and be well.